WSET Diploma D5, Chapter 4, Madeira. Madeira is a Portuguese island in the Atlantic Ocean around 600 kilometers from the coast of Morocco. The fortified wine made on this island is also called Madeira. The island of Madeira began to be colonized shortly after 1420 by Portuguese discoverers and then by wealthy settlers who worked the land with their enslaved workers and other laborers. Large areas of forest were burnt to provide room for agriculture and increase the fertility of the soil. Terraces and irrigation channels were built. Although initially sugar, wheat, and vines were the main crops and exports, the sugar industry declined during the 16th century mainly due to competition from other countries, and wine became the main export. Exports of wine grew further in the 17th and 18th centuries as British merchants arrived in Madeira and sent the wine to their colonies in North America and the West Indies. It was found that long periods of time in variable temperatures and hot conditions in the holds of ships sailing to and from the tropics improved the quality of the wines, and soon the wines were used to hold ballast on such ships, with the aim of improving the quality of the wine. The 19th and 20th centuries were more difficult for the Madeira wine trade. Powdery mildew and then phylloxera hit the island in the mid to late 19th century, destroying vines and reducing yields. During the 20th century, prohibition in the USA, 2 world wars, and the Russian Revolution negatively affected the wine trades in many of Madeira's major markets at the time. Towards the end of the century, sales became more stable, but consumer tastes had changed, and sales were far below their peak in the 18th century. The Instituto do Vinho da Madeira was founded in 1979 to regulate Madeira production, which was superseded in 2006 by the Instituto do Vinho do Bordado e do Artesanato da Madeira, IP-RAM, IVBAM. In 1986, Portugal became part of the EU and further regulations were introduced. This, together with EU subsidies, led to improvements in the quality of Madeira wines, and this investment in quality has continued into the 21st century. 4.1. The growing environment and grape growing, climate, vineyard locations, and soil. In general, Madeira experiences warm summers, averages around 20 to 22 degrees Celsius, 68 to 72 degrees Fahrenheit, and mild winters, averages around 16 to 17 degrees Celsius, 61 to 63 degrees Fahrenheit. Lack of winter dormancy can be a problem in the warmest sites. As a mountainous island, there is a range of microclimates, with temperatures becoming cooler with altitude. The mountains, reaching up to 1,800 meters, cause moist air and the humid winds arriving from the north to cool and condense into rain clouds, meaning that the north and center of the island are considerably cooler and wetter. Rainfall can exceed 3,000 millimeters per year in the center than in the south. The majority of rain falls in the autumn and winter. Madeira has an area of approximately 74,000 hectares, of which only around 450 hectares are planted with vineyards. The vineyards can be found up to altitudes of around 800 meters and tend to be located relatively near the coast, with forests covering the mountainous center of the island. The soils are of volcanic origin and high in nutrients. This, together with plentiful rain, provides fertile condition and therefore vigorous vines. Grape varieties. The powdery mildew and phylloxera that devastated Madeira's vineyards in the late 19th century dramatically changed the makeup of grape varieties on the island. The wines from varieties such as Malvasia and Tarantes were already highly esteemed, and Verdelho was the most planted grape variety. However, with vinifera varieties decimated, producers began to plant American and hybrid vines that were more resistant to pests and diseases, and therefore could produce large, reliable crops. Unfortunately, these vines could not produce wines of the same quality as vinifera varieties, and hence, with the help from EU schemes, a significant proportion of these vineyards have been replanted. That said, it is still thought that a substantial number of Madeira's vineyards are planted with American vines and hybrids, although these grapes cannot be used to make Madeira. Several vinifera varieties are permitted for the production of Madeira. These were traditionally categorized into noble, good, and authorized. The noble category reserved for Cercial, Verdelho, Boal, and Malvasia. However, they are now split into recommended varieties and authorized varieties. The latter category mainly made up of varieties that were introduced after phylloxera but have not shown the same potential for quality as the recommended varieties. Tinta Negra is the main vinifera variety that has been planted since the arrival of phylloxera, able to produce high yields and being relatively easy to grow. It was at one point categorized as good, but now is in the recommended category alongside the traditional varieties of Cercial, Verdelho, Boal, Malvasia, and Terrantes. These traditional varieties have remained important for the quality of wine that they can produce, although their plantings are small. Tinta Negra. This black grape is the most planted variety on the island. It is high yielding and easy to grow. It is only since 2015 that producers have been able to state the grape variety Tinta Negra on the label. However, much Tinta Negra is used to make wines where a level of sweetness rather than a grape variety appears on the label. It is used to produce wines at all sweetness levels. Cercial. This grape is known for its high acidity and is used in the driest styles of Madeira. It is late ripening and especially in cool sites can be the latest variety to be picked, barely above the minimum level of potential alcohol. It is resistant to powdery mildew but susceptible to botrytis, bunch rot, and can experience poor fruit set. Plantings are small. Verdelho. This grape is the second most planted vinifera variety. It has high acidity but slightly lower levels than Cercial. It is susceptible to botrytis bunch rot, color, and downy and powdery mildews. Boal. Boal is an umbrella term used for a number of grape varieties. The variety that grows on Madeira is Boal cauchudo and is also named Malvasia fina, as is found in white port. It grows best on the warm, low-altitude sites in the south of the island. However, it is susceptible to drought and therefore needs adequate irrigation to thrive. It is typically used to produce semi-sweet wines. Malvasia. This is an umbrella term for a number of grape varieties. Malvasia candida was historically the most important Malvasia and is still highly prized for its quality. However, it is very susceptible to powdery mildew, which can limit yields, and therefore there are currently only small plantings. Malvasia de São Jorge is the most common Malvasia grown on Madeira. It can produce relatively high yields, but is susceptible to botrytis bunch rot. Terrantes. Plantings of this variety are very limited. It is susceptible to powdery mildew and botrytis bunch rot, and is therefore picked soon after it reaches 9% ABV potential alcohol. Vineyard management. Madeira is a mountainous island and many vineyards are terraced to make planting on steep slopes viable. Vines are generally trained and trellised into a pergola system, here called latadas. This type of trellis allows air circulation above and beneath the vine, which helps reduce incidence of fungal disease in the humid climate. It also permits other crops to be grown on the land underneath, making effective use of a small landholding. Vineyards are also planted with cordon-trained VSP trellised vines, here called espaldera. Madeira's warm, humid climate means disease pressure is high. Downy mildew, botrytis bunch rot, and phomopsis are all problems, and although canopy management techniques such as shoot positioning and leaf removal may help, fungicide sprays are usually necessary. Irrigation is widely practiced. Rainwater is carried from the center of the island to vineyard areas by lavadas, small irrigation channels. With lower rainfall, irrigation is more required in the south of the island. The official harvest date is decided by IVBAM in consultation with producers and growers. It is usually at the end of August or the start of September. Given Madeira's topography, harvesting tends to be done by hand. The minimum potential alcohol at harvest must be 9% ABV, and in general, the grapes are picked with average potential alcohols of no more than 11% ABV. Prices paid for grapes differ based on grape health and grape variety. The traditional varieties of Cercial, Verdelho, Boal, Malvasia, and Torrontés fetch much more than Tinta Negra. The maximum permitted yield varies according to the vintage conditions, but high yields of 150 hectoliters per hectare are not unusual. This is easy to reach with fertile soils and plentiful water for irrigation. 4.2. Winemaking. On arrival at the winery, the grapes are checked for weight, health, and potential alcohol. Representatives of IVBAM must be present for the arrival of all grapes, then destemmed and crushed. The use of skin contact varies according to the producer. Wines from Tinta Negra are often fermented on their skins, particularly for medium sweet and sweet styles of wine. Some producers have introduced a period of skin contact for wines made from white grapes. The fermentation usually takes place in stainless steel vessels with ambient yeasts. The timing of fortification will depend on the style of wine that is being produced, with sweeter wines being fortified earlier in the fermentation to retain more residual sugar. Wine for sweet styles may ferment for as little as 2 days, whereas wine for dry styles may ferment for around a week. The fortifying alcohol must be 96% ABV grape spirit compared to 77% ABV in port, and therefore it will be neutral in style. Producers are free to purchase the alcohol from wherever they choose, but its quality must be checked by IVBAM. After fortification, the wines will usually contain 17 to 18% ABV. Before maturation, the wines will be fined, using bentonite, gelatin, and albumin are commonly used, and then filtered, usually with diatomaceous earth, to clarify the wine. The batches of wines will also be tasted and classified according to their style and quality. This will determine their maturation pathway. Maturation. The maturation process for modern Madeira replicates the hot oxidative conditions that the wine was subject to when being shipped in the 17th and 18th centuries. There are two options. Estufagem. This process involves the wine being heated in temperature-controlled stainless steel vessels called estufas. The tanks are heated to 45 to 50 degrees Celsius, 113 to 120 degrees Fahrenheit. A maximum of 50 degrees Celsius or 122 degrees Fahrenheit is permitted, using a heating coil or water jacket, and the wine must remain in tank for a minimum of 3 months. Representatives from IVBAM seal the vessel at the start of maturation and will break the seal when maturation is complete. Although the tank is sealed, it is usually not filled to the top, permitting some oxidation. The wine is then allowed to cool. It is filtered and then left to rest for 6 to 12 months. Wines may not be sold until the 31st of October of the second year following harvest. Wines produced by Estufagem used to be described as baked or stewed. However, the process has improved significantly over recent years. That said, this quick aging process does not produce wines with the same level of complexity as the more gradual Cantiro process. It tends to be used for 3 and 5-year-old wines made from Tinta Negra. Cantiro. This is a longer and more resource-intensive process associated with higher quality wines. The wines are matured in old oak vessels in a warm environment. This may be a loft or warehouse, both of which are heated by the sun. The vessels are usually 400 to 700 liters in size and left with a small headspace of air to aid oxidative development. Temperatures usually range from 25 to 40 degrees Celsius, 77 to 104 degrees Fahrenheit. It is not uncommon for producers to own warehouses that reach different average temperatures depending on location and design, and it is also usual for the warehouses to have warmer and cooler areas within them, e.g., vessels stored nearer the roof will be warmer than those nearer the ground. It is typical for young wines to be stored in the warmest conditions before being moved to cooler parts of the warehouse for extended aging. Humidity is high, but in these warm conditions, evaporation of water still causes the alcohol to rise very gradually to 19 to 20% ABV. This also causes other compounds in the wine, such as sugars, acidity, and aroma compounds, to concentrate. Volatile acidity also rises. Madeira is rarely racked, but due to the loss of water, barrels need regular topping up. These wines cannot be sold until 3 years after the 1st January following harvest, and, as with the estufagem system, a representative of IVBAM must seal and unseal the vessels. Further aging may be carried out often in larger wooden vessels, stainless steel vats, or demijohns to limit further evaporation. Beyond the minimum permitted time periods for estufagem and cantiro, producers may apply to IVBAM for an EU subsidy to offset the cost of aging their wine if they agree to age it for a further 5 years. The subsidy depends on the volume in hectoliters. IVBAM will seal the vessel and then unseal it after 5 years. The producer can request permission to check the wine and adjust it as necessary under the supervision of a representative from IVBAM within the 5 years. As the 5 years comes to an end, the producer can decide whether to apply for another 5-year subsidy. The maturation process used for Madeira have a significant impact on the style of the wine. Oxidation causes the color to gradually turn to brown and primary aromas to develop into tertiary notes of dried fruit. The warm aging conditions speed up oxidation and cause caramelization of the sugar in the wine. The final wines have a range of flavors dependent on style, age, and quality, including dried fruits such as apricot and raisin, caramel, chocolate, nuts, and often a smoky character. Most Madeira is a non-vintage product, and therefore blending wines from different vintages and different vineyard locations for consistency of style year on year is standard practice. There will also be some variability among different barrels in different areas of the warehouse, and therefore this can also help attain a certain style or achieve consistency. Blending can also be used to achieve a certain style for complexity. Wines in the youngest age categories may be matured mainly in estufas, but the blend may include some older cantiro wines to bring a greater complexity of flavors. Adjustments can be made as necessary, as well as fining and filtering before bottling. Caramel is used in a number of the inexpensive and mid-priced wines to add color. By comparison, carbon fining may be used to strip color. RCGM can be added to increase sweetness if desired, or blending with some drier wine to decrease sweetness. 4.3. Styles of Madeira. There is a number of defined labeling conventions for Madeira wines, usually based on the grape variety, level of sweetness, length of aging, and whether the wine is from a single vintage or multiple vintages. Madeira is made in a variety of sweetness levels and can hence be labeled with one of the following terms to reflect this: extra dry, dry, medium sweet or medium rich, and sweet or rich. It must be noted that even wines labeled dry demonstrate some degree of sweetness. There is also some overlap between the categories, and hence one producer's dry may be another producer's medium dry. Many Madeiras, especially premium-priced wines, are varietally labeled. Each grape variety is associated with the following styles of wine: Cercial, extra dry or dry. They tend to be the lightest colored and bodied of the varietal wines, with notes of citrus peel and nuts. Verdelho, medium dry. Verdelho usually has more residual sugar and therefore more body and a rounder texture than Cercial. The slight sweetness on the palate also gives the impression of sweeter flavors such as candied fruits. It may be slightly darker in color than Cercial. Boal, medium sweet. Boal is fuller and sweeter than Verdelho. It is yet darker in color with flavors of caramel, chocolate, and candied nuts. Malvasia, sweet. Malvasia, also called Malmsey, tends to be full-bodied and often brown in color. It is the sweetest style, but still balanced by refreshing high acidity. The wines can show notes of raisins and caramel. Terrantes, medium dry or medium sweet. Although these wines can have relatively high levels of sugar, there is always a delicacy to them. Aromas include citrus peel, caramel, and sometimes even floral notes. Tinta Negra, since 2015, can also be varietally labeled and can be made at any level of sweetness. For varietal wines, an indication of style, e.g. medium dry, does not need to appear on the label. As of 2015, all Madeira must be labeled with a bottling date. Further Madeira categories. Madeira with an indication of age. These are non-vintage products and may be labeled 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, and more than 50 years old. The age is an indication of style rather than a minimum or an average. The wine must be verified by IVBAM's tasting panel, accompanied by an account of all wines used in the final blend. The wines may also be labeled according to style and/or grape variety. Quality and price tend to rise with increased age. 5-year-old wines will tend to be made predominantly from Tinta Negra, and most of the wine will have been through the Estufagem system. They are often good to very good in quality and mid-priced. Wines that are 10 years old or older are often made with one of the white varieties, but some producers use Tinta Negra, especially now its name can appear on the label. These wines will be made from parcels that have all been aged in the Cantero system. With increased time spent maturing, the oldest wines tend to be increasingly concentrated and complex and have the highest levels of acidity. Wines that are 20 years old or more will often be of outstanding quality and sell at premium and super premium prices. Standard blends. Many Madeira wines do not qualify for the age indications specified above. These Madeiras may be sold between 2 to 3 years after harvest and are categorized as corrente by IVBAM. These wines are sometimes labeled with a brand name of the producer, for example, Blandy's Duke of Clarence, or simply one of the style descriptions, for example, Henriques and Henriques Full Rich Madeira. Rainwater. This is a wine made in a relatively light style in terms of alcohol, body, and concentration of flavors. They are usually around 18% ABV and must be medium dry and can only be associated with a maximum age indication of 10 years. The name is thought to have originated when some casks awaiting shipment were left open outside and the rain diluted the wine. Frasqueira, also called Garrafeira. These wines usually represent the flagships of a producer's range. This is the term for vintage Madeira that has been aged in wood for a minimum of 20 years. The wines must be made from a prescribed grape variety, which must appear on the label together with the year of harvest and the year of bottling. Since 2015, the list of permitted grape varieties has been extended to include Tinta Negra. The quality of the wine must be assessed by IVBAM's tasting panel. Frasqueira wines typically command super premium prices. The exact style will depend on the grape variety from which they are made. However, all of these wines are notable for their concentration and complexity of tertiary flavors, with sweetness balanced by high acidity. Colheita. A Colheita wine is a vintage Madeira coming from grapes of a single year that has been aged in wood for a minimum of 5 years. These wines may either include a blend of varieties or be made from a single variety. The grape does not need to appear on the label, but the harvest year and year of bottling must be stated. The quality of the wine must be assessed by IVBAM's tasting panel. This is a relatively new category which only emerged in 2000, but the much lower aging requirement than required for Frasquita has made it popular, and now all producers make Colheita wines. 4.4. Wine law and wine business. Structure of the industry. Madeira's vineyard land is highly fragmented, with over 1,000 growers and an average vineyard holding of 0.3 hectares. The winemaking and maturation side of the industry is extremely consolidated with only 8 producers. The largest 3 companies are Justino's, Madeira Wine Company, and Henrique and Henrique. Only 2 producers own or rent vineyards, Henrique and Madeira Wine Company, which only cover small percentages of each of their production volumes, and therefore all producers buy grapes. A producer will often need to buy grapes from as many as a few hundred growers. To smooth this process, many producers will use agents who will provide consultation for growers during the growing season and coordinate the harvesting. IVBAM. Founded in 2006, IVBAM is responsible for coordinating and supporting the wine and embroidery industries in Madeira. IVBAM plays an active role in monitoring Madeira stocks and quality control. Representatives must be present at grape reception and at the beginning and end of the aging process to seal and then unseal the maturation vessel. An IVBAM tasting panel and laboratory check the profile of wines to be labeled with an age indication or a vintage year. Technicians from IVBAM will also pay visits to the growers on the island and give advice and support as needed. IVBAM also set the regulations as part of the production and labeling of Madeira, many which have been mentioned in the previous sections. Madeira sales. Sales of Madeira have remained relatively stable for the past few decades, and in 2019, total sales were 3.2 million liters. The majority of sales volume comes from young Corrente Madeira wines, generally made from Tinta Negra, 1.9 million liters in 2019, with 5 and then 10-year-old Madeira being the most common age-indicated categories. The 5 and 10-year-old categories also account for the highest proportion of wines labeled as Cercial, Verdelho, Boal, or Malvasia. Most Torrentes is sold as Frasquita or as 20-year-old wine. In 2019, Colheita and Frasquita together made up just over 44,000 liters, and these vintage products are generally more common than the older age-indicated categories of non-vintage Madeiras, e.g. 20 to 50-year-olds. Sales volumes of Madeira as a whole have shown a gradual increase, 18.7 million euros in 2019, with Colheita and Frasquita increasing their share of total sales values. The largest market for Madeira is France, 0.9 million liters in 2019. The second largest market is Madeira itself, 0.49 million liters. The tourist trade makes an important contribution. Germany, 0.29 million liters, and Japan, 0.26 million liters, are the next most important for volume. France and Germany tend to be important markets for inexpensive Madeira, whereas the domestic market and Japan are more important for more expensive wines. Significant volumes of inexpensive Madeira are used for cooking and/or as part of confectionery. These wines are heated by the estufagem and are often released from the winery and can be released for sale on October 31st of the year after harvest. Madeira for cooking purposes, e.g. for the production of sauces, may be modified with the addition of salt and sometimes pepper. Madeira that is used in the food industry or for other purposes, e.g. it is sometimes used as a flavoring in schnapps, makes up around 1/5 of total volume sales of Madeira. End of chapter.